everybody. So quick show of hands. Who uses Miro here when they're
All right, love it.
That's good. That's a good sign. So we're going to be digging into not so much Miro the product, but how the teams are building Miro. But before I jump into Miro, I want to talk a little bit because you have an incredible experience. So prior to Miro, you were both the CPO and then the CEO of Envision. Can you talk to us about that experience?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people here probably have gone through the history of Envision, so maybe let's talk about the elephant in the room first. Love the nervous giggles too, by the way. It's fantastic. So, look, I mean, I think Envision, probably most of us here have built a lot of our career using Envision. It's brought a lot of designers to truly have a seat at the table, which is fantastic. And then even like the process of design thinking, it's been like a forefront of that. So an amazing platform, but it did get disrupted, like full stop. Got disrupted by Figma. Ultimately Envision and Sketch were a combo tool, and then Figma came around the corner and it's like, what if we mash that all together, put it on the web, made it really collaborative, and then what are you gonna do? Checkmate, right? And so, look, we did our best to try to respond. I will say the hot take market is pretty profound around the hot takes of what we could have done better. So feel free to go and find your favorite Medium post or LinkedIn post. But I joined as CPO to spearhead. We had multiple products, and one of the products that was growing really fast was Freehand. And so Freehand is a visual collaboration tool very similar to Miro. And it was growing very fast, and even when customers were switching to Figma, they were starting to use Freehand wall-to-wall. So my job as CPO was to say, okay, how do you navigate the change management of all these organizations, our internal organization too, to focus on building this forward? And so that was my job. And then over time, I took over the reins as CEO from the founder, Clark, an amazing visionary entrepreneur, and we brought it together. So how we landed at Miro is that ultimately our passion has always been how do you unlock cross-functional teams, right? How do cross-functional teams work better together? And we're seeing that is the ground zero of business impact. And so that passion, what we were doing with Freehand, also shared passion with Miro. And so Andre and I had the CEO of Miro, had a lot of great conversations, and therefore, happily, the team at Envision mostly joined Miro, and we're still doing some amazing things together.
Awesome. It sounds like a bit of a roller coaster ride over a couple of years.
Yeah, it was an emotional journey.
Okay, so let's talk about Miro then. So your title is CPTO, and we're going to get into what that actually means in a second. But I just want to talk about first. So you were the CPO of Envision, became the CEO, as you said. You took over the reins.
Yeah.
And now you're gone into a CPTO role.
Yeah.
So what has led you? Where is your passion? Like, do you love the product? Did you like the CEO? Where do you see your?
Did you guys see Rory just sort of said you went down a tick? What was that about?
Unintentional.
No. I think ultimately what galvanizes me is building amazing products to make a really massive impact, right? And what I'm energized about, and it's very meta, is changing ways of working, delivering that impact, activating organizations to deliver and build amazing things. And so, sometimes a CEO is the leader that's going to do that, and sometimes, in Miro's case, being the CPTO really fills my bucket, and it makes a lot of sense. And again, I would say that Miro probably has the best-in-class leadership team, and there's nothing more fulfilling than having partners in crime working together. So it's been a joy.
Excellent. And I guess because when I first saw CPTO, I didn't actually understand what it meant.
Yeah.
So can you explain, because that will give context to how you're, as you said,
Sure.
enabling the team. So what is a CPTO role?
Chief Product and Technology Officer, and every time I say it, I too am like, I kind of go up. I'm Chief Product and Technology Officer. But no, I mean, I think it's, look, there's a couple things. One is at the end of the day, engineering, product, and design have to work really well together as a trio to deliver great things. And that foundation, when you are not, how do you actually build that culture and actually have you solve things? I think there is a trend in the market where there's starting to be this common construct, right? And it is about, there's oftentimes you find engineering might have their shadow projects, and then, you know, design might have their shadow project. Product acts like they're Steve Jobs, and they think they can do anything, and then like, and so a lot of my job is to say like, no, we are one team, we're pulling things together. I will say, especially for designers in the house, it's really offensive that's not CPDTO, but like that's even worse. But or even like designers who are like under CPOs, you know. And so I think a lot of what I'm trying to do is say like, actually no, it really is 3 common seats at the table, and you need to like do that to make the magic happen.
Excellent. And I guess one of the challenges, particularly as you go up in your career, you have that background of chief product officer. Was technology a challenge, or is that something that you've always been, or when you took on that remit as well, was that difficult?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I am technical enough to do this, and I was a CTO for one of the companies that I founded, so enough to be dangerous is the idea. But again, I do think it is about building trust within everybody, each discipline's craft, to empathize and understand what the challenges they go through, what their isms are, right? Engineering is usually about tech debt and, you know, always having to deliver impact but never able to do it to scale, and they're on the hook with the buzzer that keeps them up at night. Or the first ones to blame when there is like an outage or whatnot. You know, designers know that they have to do things, and they really have to think about their craft and the experience and their information architecture, and it's not something that you can just whip up really quickly. But, you know, how do they have the safe space? And then product is always on the front line of trying to make impact and be the ones that's pulling everything together, and it's very difficult. So having that level of empathy is a very important aspect.
Awesome. I'm going to jump into a bit of the content now, not so much your background, but like
Sure.
more into how you're managing. And if we can flick on to the question slide, because I'd like to have people, if you want to submit some questions as well, please do. And we'll get to your questions as well.
And Rory, how are we sitting? Are we being casual? Or
I don't know. It looks a little too casual.
Like, we're really like, yeah.
Yeah.
Your
Now I'm
posture's-
thinking about my
Your
posture.
posture is fantastic. It's great.
So chief product officer, one thing I always think of is you're ultimately accountable for the success of the product. It comes to you, as well as technology. But how do you balance, so if you have that accountability, but you also want, and it's a big thing that we've talked about throughout this conference, is how do you empower teams? Because you want that innovation coming from the bottom up, the groundswell up. So how do you personally, in Miro, how do you balance that of, okay, you're accountable, so you want your ideas implemented, but also you don't want to stifle the innovation?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this type of construct of like, sometimes people call it top-down, bottoms-up, or sometimes people call it other things. I find it just like a false narrative, right? Which is, we are one team that's working together to solve problems. My job is to break it down to solvable chunks, right? And galvanize an organization to solve those problems, right? And so, what I do find in a lot of organizations is, you know, people tend to feel like they're a meritocracy, and like their organizations are starting to build things together, like, and they're like, my thing is the most important thing for the organization. I just find that's you know, a failure in leadership to kind of get the overall strategy cascading all the way through the organization. And so the way I do it is a lot of rinse repeat, like a continuous improvement on the strategy, continuous improvement on the delivery. And really, there's no difference. So when I create a product strategy, it is co-created, right? I'll lay the scaffolding, I'll do the first version, I'll send it out using Miro with a talk track, and I'll share it with people, and ultimately, I try to get my leaders activated, I try to get the organization. I will tell you that the comment bombs in my Miro boards are insane, but like it's great because people feel like they're part of the solution and they understand innately what the problems to solve are. And that's a really important aspect. That manifests in many different operational ways, but ultimately that's the, when I first joined Miro, that was exactly what I did. Here's the product strategy, here's the direction, what do you guys think, right?
And can we jump into it, because it's fantastic, but that's often what I find is it's kind of, that's great, but how did it work in practice? And are you just giving platitudes that, oh, I opened it up and then everybody agreed with me because I'm the senior leader? Or did you actually get people taking ownership?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think for sure people were taking ownership, and maybe that's a great testament to Miro's culture is, boy, was there radical candor. so it was a really good one. But, look, I mean, I think a lot of our job as leaders is to go out and seek to understand too, right? The dynamics of a room is really important. If I'm presenting something in a large room, maybe the most introverted person isn't going to speak up. And even if I'm like, I really want your feedback, anyone have any questions, they're not going to speak up. So it is finding those moments. I find asynchronous collaboration is a great one where you'll get some people to share more viscerally than if it were like in a room where it's a little bit more theatrical. So I think there's a lot of techniques. The tool belt is pretty vast in terms of how do you get that feedback. But for me, it's to like truly get the feedback, and I can tell when I'm not. Right, I can tell when it's like, okay, leader, and things like that. But ultimately, breaking it down to solvable chunks, activating my product leaders and EPD leaders to then take their problem to solve, workshopping with their teams. It is like fractals. Like my job is no different than the product leader's job next down to the next down. Everyone's doing the same motion, which is strategy, solvable chunks, communicating to their team, how are you solving that, but not be prescriptive.
Excellent. I'd like to jump into getting to probably a bit of specifics, because you mentioned that kind of fractal structure.
Yeah.
I'd love to get an understanding. So you have nearly 900 people kind of across engineering, product, design. How do you structure that? Because how do you get that amount of people aligned to make sure that they're going in the right place? So can you explain a bit about kind of how you're structured and how your teams are structured?
Yeah, so again, probably standard things that we all talk about, but it's people, process, and product, right? And people is sort of the org design aspect of it. The process is the ways of working. And then product is our product strategy, right? And maybe it should be product, people, and process. But ultimately, when we establish the strategy, right, and understanding what are the moving parts and what are the solvable chunks, we do want to look at the organizational structure and make sure that it's aligned. And the way we do it is breaking that down to, classic, we call them streams and teams, but zones and squads, the same concept. And we do have a trio model to make sure that EP and D are on those specific areas. For us, a lot of what we're trying to solve is not being too prescriptive on the surface ownership, right? Like, we're not team commenting, right? And therefore, like, the only job they can do is like have a roadmap for comments. We are team asynchronous collaboration, right? And their remit is to improve asynchronous collaboration, and they are there to solve a problem. They are not there to, and so they are doing some innovative things like talk track if you use it, or others. It's not just commenting, and it happens because they are solving a problem. Right, and so we are trying to structure it in that way where they feel like they have their mission that cascades up to like the overall strategy.
And did you have to, was that, because you mentioned Miro's culture at the start, was that something that you actively had to build, that kind of ownership? So I love the point of, like, if you called it comments, that's restricting what they can work on. But did you have the opposite problem of you're kind of going, okay, solve these problems, and then people are like, well, I don't know what to do there?
Yeah. So that is then back down to look, leaders speak in the how, right? Strong leaders can abstract how leaders speak in the how and then gets the problem statement out of it, right? That's probably one of the classic jujitsu moves that I think a lot of people are really good at is you kind of accept the fact that your C-suite person is going to come in and paint in the air and be like, what if we moved that button 15 pixels to the left and made it bigger and made it blink? Wouldn't that improve conversion rates? And you're like, yeah, man, that's really awesome. We'll try that. But and so like getting that like ism of the why is really important. The way we do it is, we will lay a problem statement like asynchronous collaboration. We will talk about some things in the how, just to loosen people up, right? It's not easy to like, we will rigorously talk about strategy first and then problem second. It's a good session. But ultimately, in our ways of working is we try to make sure that teams are empowered to have the right kickoff, right, requirements gathering. They set pace to a solutions review date, right? So after kickoff, they literally establish a date, right? And that's really important so that they're setting pace around when are you going to come back and offer us what you think is the right solution? And that's also where you unpack if the team is like, well, we actually want to, we'll come back to you in 3 months. And then everyone's like, wait a minute, 3 months, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we want to go to the zoo and observe the marsupials to then understand how people behave. And you're like, whoa, no, it's just a notification bell. Maybe we can go a little bit further. And so it's like, well, I want to validate if people use the internet. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's validated. And so like those are the types of things that we're like deconstructing very quickly and finding those ambiguity. A solutions review is when you want them to come with a vision. You know, again, if common constructs, and I'll mix all my metaphors if you guys want, but like, you know, the Ferrari, I want to hear what they think the Ferrari is, right? And then ultimately what the skateboard is to start, right? And so this is empowering the teams to be like, we think it's that. But there's a moment in time that we converge, talk about it, and understand, and that gives them the empowerment of solving the right problems.
Brilliant. So can we just dig into that? Like, so I love the kind of the 3 months, and there's big pushback, and that's a huge thing that we've talked about, and a lot of the talks is like the value of upfront research. But then there's also a movement towards continuous research. Just always be talking to your customers, and that's validating your ideas. So do you follow, is there a particular methodology that you follow? Do you do continuous research, or how would you describe the teams do those phases?
Yeah, I mean, I ultimately, I think a lot of what we try to do is not be too religious about methodologies, other than it should be very iterative. Like speed is our #1 nomenclature for understanding this. So if you are, I think team souls die a little bit when they have like a 3-month project where you don't do anything but talk about the work, right? And so what we try to do is really break that down and be like, okay, how do we solvable chunks? And then ultimately, what are the tools do we have at our disposal? We have existing customer insights. We have existing bodies of research work. Like, I see a lot of reinventing the wheel of research, and then the researcher finally raises their hand and they're like, we literally did a diary study 2 months ago. Why aren't you using that, right? And so but this happens a little bit more fluidly and organically the faster things behave, right? And so we do a lot of user research, validation. We find the speed to concepting as a huge unlock. So it's back to like the skateboard metaphor. Oftentimes teams mix the idea of getting the right solution and digging deep, and then like all of a sudden the Figma file is like a flip book of interactions when it's like, wait, you needed 3 artboards to put in front of a customer. Why wouldn't you do that? And so like we just constantly try to pressure test that. And I do think it's a really important aspect of the cross-functional team and the tensions there, which is not I will toss this over to design and they will decide what to do, and then they will toss it back and I'll tell them it'll take 8 years to build, and then I'll toss it over and then we're gonna play ping pong. It's how do you get teams to work together? How do you get an engineer to say like, well, couldn't we do that a little bit faster by doing it this way? And it's the psychology of the team to make them not feel like you're stepping on each other's toes, but you're working together. And
being the CPTO role, does that help kind of break that down?
100%. I think so, because I think that what I'm trying to do is deliver impact in getting teams to understand operating functions and breaking those silos down a little bit further. And then again, for me, it's celebrating the successes. It doesn't have to be one person. I think there's amazing trios of leaders, design, engineering, and product. But it is celebrating those like little inertia busting moments where the teams are trying to figure those out.
Brilliant. We'll open it up to some questions from the audience. I have a few more, but the top voted one, how are you working to keep Miro relevant when tools like Figma are integrating features like FigJam that are similar to what you're offering?
Yeah, I think in general, the Canvas-based how teams are working is an a giant opportunity, right? And I think we're in the very, very early innings, and I think there are a lot of ways of doing it. Miro's claim to fame and what we are passionate about is we believe we are the home where everyone feels like it was a home built for them, right? And so we are leaning very hard on the idea, and this is back to what I was talking about. If cross-functional teams are activated, they all feel like they have a seat at the table, they behave differently. They start trying to solve harder problems. They start becoming more ambitious. And so a lot of what we're pushing on is not to be the adjacent product or the extended arm of others, it's to really centralize along that line. We think there's a lot of democratization coming up. So a lot of our roadmap is built around, not democratizing some of the specialized tooling and focusing more on how do you push the bounds. And if I would guess most of you are using Miro for some level of like brainstorming and ideation phases. There's a giant push that we hear a lot from our customers on like, man, I tried to hack Miro to do a project plan, and it was a hot mess, and it was really hard, but like, why can't you do more structured data while preserving the energy of the teams and having engaged teams? Why do I have to context switch out and go somewhere else? And so how do we create those fluid motions? And so, look, I think we're playing a different ballgame, right? We're just, the same metaphor of the canvas is true. We just think the powerful elements of that is disrupting fundamentally a bigger birth of how people work. And yeah, there will be a couple announcements coming up in July and October.
Any sneak announcements or?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Hoping to get
breaking. Yeah.
Brilliant. We just folded product under technology for the first time. Any tips or warnings you can share?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, I sort of cringe on hearing product under technology, but I think it's probably a naming thing. It's probably more like a branding thing for your organization than anything else. But it's no different than what I was talking about, right? It's I don't think product design or engineering should be under something that is under a specific functional name, right? Technology, maybe, yes, broad. It's broad enough. So my tips are, though, is that it really is about the problems to solve and the cross-functional teams owning the problem to solve. I think if you're finding yourself sort of saying like, well, now the power center is the engineer who's making decisions and they're looking at me like just write the requirements and let's get on with it, then yeah, there's probably a challenge that needs a little bit of like a discussion about. But no, I think this is sort of this back to continuous improvement. There is a continuous ways of working improvement where the key is to keep the kind of power centers even and balanced, regardless of how you're structured, right?
And I can imagine, particularly if you're empowering lots of teams, you can have that repeated in nearly every team, because if you have like product, engineering, design, representation, there could be power struggles. So do you have any tangible examples of how you're trying to, as you say, equalize that in continuous improvement?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that everyone wrestles with is do you deliver impact fast, or do you address like tech debt, or do it the right way first? And I think this is back to the continuous improvement philosophy. The contract, though, has to be when you realize what's working, you have to address it to scale, right? And I think this is all about trust. Every organization I've joined, and I've tended to join sort of matured organizations that need a little bit of a kick in the pants to get innovative again, is there's already this erosion of trust. It's like the engineers are going to be like, yeah, I'm just going to say that's a 6-month project, because if I don't, then and then you start doing the why, and you're like, why is moving that button 2 steps to the right, 6 months? It's like, how is that possible? And then, but they won't say, and then finally you get to the heart of it, which is not about the technical why. It's the like, well, last time I did this scrappily, our DevOps team yelled at us for like 3 weeks straight, and blah blah. And so it's really about the, I think it's really incumbent on leaders to unpack the cultural aspects first before even dealing with anything else. But yeah, no, I think for us, it's we I had a couple projects early on in the Miro experience where we launched a couple features, and it was like, this will take 6 weeks to build. And I was like, how is that possible? And let's do it. And then finally it was like, oh. And I was like, well, my goal is to get 3 iterations really fast. So launch it in 2 weeks. Let's see how it's working, launch it in 2 weeks. And then once it's done, you have my commitment that we will address it and look at the tech and clean it up. So I think that's the journey that everyone goes on, which is we've built the trust that it's like, oh no, we didn't just move on to the next shiny and new thing. We actually addressed it.
And what we talked about earlier in my talk actually was about the challenges that teams have getting code out the door, whether it's like architecture review, security review, change control boards. Is there something that you empower? How do you empower the teams if you want it every 2 weeks?
Yeah, so we are religious in our ways of working, which is kickoff, solutions review, pre-release review, and then post-launch review. And treating those not as like gates or others, but like iterative processes. So each one is a loop, and they're fast loops. They're very, very fast loops. The reason that's powerful for some of the ones that you just talked about is that the stakeholders or the RACI, I'm so sorry I said RACI, but I did, involved is that the security person is there at the kickoff. So they are now, instead of the like gatekeeper at the end that's doing the gladiator like thumbs up, thumbs down moment, they are there, and the expectation for them is like, hey, if you're thinking that there's a blind spot here around security or others, you need to speak up. You know, it's not the other way around, right? And what's that's done is that it started to unlock velocity, because instead of like last second, like, oh my God, we can't get this out the door because there's a curveball, then we just know it up front. We're taking the pain up front, right? And like iterating and faster and faster and faster.
Cool. I think we're out of time, but we'll do one last question because I'm enjoying myself too much. There's much conversation about how designers show value to the business. What have you seen that's worked?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that there's 2 things that I think truly work, right? One is to never talk process. Like, it's all about the business impact and how you're going to deliver the business impact and being creative about it. And so it's always been amazing when a designer comes with a new idea, right? Solving a problem from like the UX standards, articulates those interaction models for business impact, right? Like, we are doing some amazing things on the canvas that our designers are leading, right? The way they're presenting it is not like, look at this spinner wheel, this is so amazing, how dope is this interaction? It was more about the like, hey, this micro interaction gets more people more engaged. If they get more engaged, the more likely for them to co-create, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a little bit of a description there. The last one I would say is there's a huge value about designers having a seat at the table with engineers around collaborating deeply with engineers to find the best solution possible. I think endemic in our industry is you spend 3 weeks on your artboards, you hand it to the developer, they say it's gonna take 6 weeks, then everyone's like, okay, oh well. And then it's just like a 6-week project, when if the designer sat with the engineer and was like, wait, why is that? And then, well, the developer's like, oh, well, actually, if you do 2 steps to the left, that's a 2-day project. And having that level of collaboration, I think design leadership has to like figure out how do you break those molds and then get more closer together.
Brilliant. That was a great answer. So I just want to thank you very much for sharing. That was really insightful.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.